Hey guys, Alan here, Solid Rock Sunday School class. Hey, it's great to be with you. And boy, this COVID, it definitely has ramped up this week, kind of half expected after Halloween and all. And, you know, as I kind of suspected, the governor, he took and he did some lockdowns again on us. But so for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be meeting outside of the Bethel Christian School building in the parking lot. So until things change, we're going to do that for the next 2 weeks. Then at that point, I think some more decisions will be made whether we go online or where we're headed with that. But anyway, we'll just see how that all works out. Saw the new remodel this week. It looks real good. Can't wait to be back in services here. But again, we're, as you can tell, taping from the Kennedy compound for the Solid Rock Sunday School class, and will be for a while here. You know, we've been teaching on Thanksgiving, and I'm kind of working at a disadvantage here. This morning, I am working off my iPad instead of off my computer. So you may see me glitch here just a little bit more than normal here, but you know, our outline that we've been running with here has been, we have it so good. And we talked about that last week, just how rich we are as Christians and how rich we are as Americans. And I want us to remember that as we step into this week's lesson. We have it so good. We're rich compared to the rest of this world. And Christians are rich, period. It doesn't matter where you live. But today we're going to look at it. We enjoy it so much. And I'm going to end on probably the biggest piece of it here. We express it so little. And I'm going to kind of do things a little differently this morning. I have kind of a long story I want to tack on towards the end of the lesson today that hopefully kind of expresses here some of the thoughts and expresses a little more of how we need to think about people and how we need to be thankful here as we go into this Thanksgiving week. I'm going to pick up, though, I'm going to start in 1 Timothy, the 6th chapter. I'm going to pick it up in verse number 17 this morning. He's talking to Timothy here, and he says, charge them that are rich. You see why I happened to mention that just a moment ago. We're rich. We are rich. But he says, charge them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who giveth us all things to enjoy. Notice what he says here. I'm just going to catch this verse by verse, and just catching it just a couple more verses. But he says, don't trust in riches. Don't trust in money. Don't be high-minded. Don't think yourself as something you're not. Don't be above people. We're all people. Don't be above people. I don't care if you're a zillionaire. Don't be above people. Don't trust in your riches, but in the living God who giveth us richly all things. Notice he says to enjoy. He's given us all these things, and we're supposed to enjoy them. But as I said in the title of this week's startup, we enjoy it too much. In verse number 18, he goes on. He goes on and says that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. Notice he says, do good. Do good works. Be rich in good works. And then I think this is really key at the end of the verse, willing to communicate. What does that mean? You're not above talking to people. You're not above talking to anybody, no matter who you are. Laying up in store for yourself a good foundation against the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. This is so that we may lay hold on eternity in heaven with the Lord Jesus Christ. God, he takes and he richly provides for us. Everything he gives us, he wants us to enjoy it. I think that's sometimes something that people don't understand. He's given it to us and he wants us to enjoy it in this life. But don't put it above God. But often again, we enjoy it way too much. It's all right to take and enjoy God's blessings, but not to the point where we take and we focus on that, where we edge God out. We are not to focus on the gifts, but rather the giver of those gifts is where we need to put our focus. But here's where I want to spend most of our time this morning. We express it so little. I'm going to look at two different versions here. Of course, I'm going to start out here with King James Version. But I am going to look at the English Standard Version, the ESV here with some of this. So he says, "This know also, that in last day perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful." Stop right there for a second. Unthankful and unholy, without natural affections, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good. He goes on, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. And then he says, from such type of people, stay away. Because why? Because they influence us. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women, laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. I'm going to read this quickly in the English Standard Version, then I'm going to come back and I just want to talk about a couple of points here real quick. But he says, "But understand this, in the last days will come times of difficulty. People will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abrasive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappreciative, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving God, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God." I like some of the wording here that he's given us in the English Standard Version. It's the reason I wanted to step over to that. But he says there's going to be difficult times. There's going to be perilous times that come. Men are going to love themselves much more than others. And they're going to boast, and they're going to be proud. They're going to be disobedient. They're going to be unthankful. That's the key word I want us to look at, that unthankful. And right there next to unthankful, he says unholy. And then he goes on, he says without natural affection. So what he's saying, and that picks up kind of in that English Standard Version. I just wanted to look back, but he's saying heartless. We will be heartless, without natural affection. And then that last, he says incontinent. That's without control is what he's talking about here. That we have we don't have any boundaries upon our lives. Despisers of those that are good. That you even hate seeing somebody that does good because, why? Because it convicts you. And he goes on, traitors, heady, high-minded, taking and thinking of yourself much more than you should, thinking you're above people. And he goes on saying lovers of pleasures rather than lovers of God. We start taking and worshiping the creation instead of worshiping the Creator here. Verse 5, I think, is really important because I really think it describes some of what we're living in today. having a form of godliness. How many people do you know that seem to have this form of godliness? They mention God here and there when it's something that's to their advantage. But they don't live the life, do they? And he says, stay away from these kind of people. And then this last verse, number 7, ever learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. I'm going to read this in the English Standard Version real quick. Always learning and never able to arrive to a knowledge of the truth. So, if it's good, it came from God. But let's not forget God here. It's okay to enjoy the blessings of God. We should enjoy the blessings of God. He wants us to enjoy it, but not to the point where they become our main focus. Not to the point where we put, again, the creation over the Creator. Let's look back. By the way, I kind of mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again. We're all rich. But let's look back at that verse 17 in 1 Timothy, the 6th chapter, verse 17. Charge them that are rich in this world, and we're all rich. He says, charge them that are rich. He's talking to us. And this is the way that we should not be acting. We may not be millionaires in our bank accounts, but we're millionaires compared to the rest of this world. We have so much, but often we express our gratitude so little. 1 Thessalonians, the 5th chapter, verse 18, he says, in everything, give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. Get it right. We have it so good, we enjoy it so much, but often we express it so little. I told you I had kind of a lengthy story I wanted to put here at the end of this. And it's from a book, I'm No Hero. And this all occurred back in on May the 19th, 1967. It is a very, very true story. When we see here that there's a pilot, Ensign Charles Plum, and he's flying F-4 Phantoms. And he's flying off the Kitty Hawk here. And it's his 75th mission here over North Vietnam. And as he's flying the 75th mission, he takes and he sees this flash out of the corner of his eye, this white plume. And it was a surface-to-air missile that came up and hit his fighter jet. Seconds later, terrible explosion rocked his aircraft. It inverted him. It threw him upside down. He fought and fought for control of this aircraft and just to be able to get it to a point that he could eject out of it. And so the aircraft, it started plummeting toward the earth. He got back control of it enough that he was able to take and eject out of that aircraft. Instantly the cockpit cover was blown off for the aircraft, and in a split second later, the rocket takes and it launches him out of his seat. It's some 18 Gs, 18 times the force of gravity that shoots him up into the air and away from his aircraft, enough to tear arms and legs off, off your body. So you got to be careful as these things happen. But after what he describes as feeling like an absolute eternity, the seat takes and it separates from him, and he hears that whoof type of a sound, and his parachute canopies, it opens, it inflates, he looks up, Everything looks pretty good. Almost the entire parachute is in good shape. A couple little areas are blown out, but other than that, he's coming down. But as he's coming down, he has all these anti-aircraft rounds that are exploding kind of all around him. Charles started to take and destroy all of his flight schedules. Anything that was confidential, he got rid of. He had time to do all of that on his way down to the ground. And finally, he found kind of he was looking for a good place to land, but he really couldn't find anything. He lands out in the middle of a rice paddy. Soon he's surrounded with this group of local farmers who take and start beating him with shovels and start beating him with hoes. And they put him in a pen here, and finally, a few minutes later, soldiers arrived, and they carried him off to a prison camp. He was only 50 miles away from Hanoi, but might as well have been 5,000 miles. And there he began 6 horrifying years in a prisoner of war camp in North Vietnam. After 2,103 days of captivity, Charles Plumb, he was I can't even say it, excuse me, but he was brought back to the United States. He knew what would be next as he began all of his medical care, because he was not treated right, so of course he had some medical needs. He went through constant debriefings. He was at the Great Lakes Naval Station, and as one of the first POs kind of to come back, especially back to the Midwest, he'd kind of turn into a celebrity piece. Reporters were, kind of taking and nosing around quite a bit and being around, and, they wanted to know how in the world he survived those years in a prison camp. Over and over he relived his experience and recounted it, and how his faith in God, his self-discipline, his love for America, all of that is what sustained him. One day after being interviewed, though, Charles got on the elevator to go back to his room, and before the door closed fully, a man wedged his shoulders into the door, kept it open here for a moment longer, and he was one of the reporters, and he was crying. He was crying. He told Charles how much he was feeling sorry for himself until he heard Charles' story. He thanked Charles profoundly for his service. Charles went on to take and to do a lot of speaking engagements as far as with what his experiences were here. But, thousands of speeches and presentations later, U.S. Navy Captain Charles Plumb continued to inspire people even today in this world. But the story, it really doesn't end there. That's not the end of the story. The rest of the story here, I guess you could say this is what the Paul Harvey, the rest of the story. One day, Charles and his wife, they were having dinner in Kansas City restaurant. Charles took and noticed a man. He kept looking at him, looking over at the table at him. The man got up finally, came over to Charles's table and asked, "You're Charles Plumb, aren't you?" And Charles, he says yes, and he starts kind of going through his mind saying, who is this guy? I mean, he knows my name. Of course, I'm a little bit famous here because I've spoke a lot, but, who is he? I just don't know who you are, he's thinking in the back of his mind. And the man continued, "You flew giant fighter jets in Vietnam from the aircraft Kitty Hawk, and you were shot down. You spent 6 years in a POW camp in Vietnam. How in the world did you know that?" asked Charles. He says, how do you know about all of this stuff? And he said, "I packed your parachute." Charles gasped in surprise and with gratitude. They embraced, they shook hands. The man said, he says, I guess it worked. And Charles, he assured him, he says, I wouldn't be here if it hadn't, you know. They reminisced about some of their service there on the Kitty Hawk, and Charles went back to his room that night and he couldn't sleep. Kept wondering, you know, what he had looked like as a Navy uniform man working there. You know, these pilots, they took and thought of themselves as something way more than the rest of the crew. They were the fighter pilots. He tried to imagine what this guy may have looked like with his white hat and his bib on the back, his bell-bottom trousers. You know, what did he really look like? I wonder how many times I've seen this man and never even said hello. He never said, good morning, how are you, or anything. Because you see, fighter pilots, they don't do that. They don't talk to sailors. Charles thought of many hours the sailor had spent at long wooden tables, taking and working down in the bowels of the ship, carefully taking and weaving in these parachutes, folding the silks perfectly so that if they ever had to be used, that they would come out and work properly. Literally holding the pilot's fate in their hands. Knowing the fact that probably many of the parachutes would never even open, would never probably ever be dispensed. That there was always a chance of it. So they took great care, great pride in it. No glory in that job, is there? Now when Charles takes and he gives these talks, he asks his audience something. Who packed your parachute? You see, everyone has someone who takes and has helped them along the way in their life. Charles said he needed many kinds of parachutes that terrible day when he was shot down in his plane, you know. He needed that physical parachute, of course. He needed his mental parachute. He needed his emotional parachute. He needed his spiritual parachute. He called on all those chutes to bring him home safely. Sometimes in our daily challenges of life, we miss what's really important. We may just fail to say hello or please or thank you, congratulations to someone. You may just fail to give somebody a compliment just because maybe you're above them. We just fail to do anything nice for people sometimes. As you go through the week, the month, the year, you know, take time to remember, to recognize people who packed your parachutes. I have so many people in my life that packed my parachute. I'm going to mention a few. If I've missed some, I didn't mean to. But I'm going to mention a few along the way here. Several of them are dead. In fact, many of them are dead. Of course, my mom and my dad had a lot to do with my character, how I was brought up. I remember one particular pastor. He passed away just a couple of years ago now. Pastor Francis Boyles. He taught me some principles in my life. I had him when I was probably about 10 to about 13 years old. I had him as my pastor. He was followed directly back behind that with another pastor that I had for several years, and he turned around and became my pastor again, Pastor Charles Harris. I had him during my teen years, and he's passed on also at this point, just this year, I believe. But I had him during my teen years, and I traveled with him, and I learned so much from that man. I can remember so many different things. I had a youth director that he was always kind of in the background, but Bob McGill. He was also the music director at the church I attended. Then I had a junior high teacher that really meant a lot to me. He taught me probably more than anything. He took me under his wings. He taught me some principles that were incredible. And I became very close to him, very close to a couple people in his family. I went to a Christian school. He was a great godly man, Mr. Allen. He's dead at this point, but I'll never forget the man. I remember as my high school years that I took, and all my life I was kind of around my cousin, Richard Kennedy, but during those high school years, he had a lot to do with forming my character. And he was even here at the Bakersfield Church for a few years, and he passed on a few years ago now. When I was in college, I had another man that took me under, actually more than one man that took me under his wing and taught me a lot. I had Wade Jernigan, traveled with the man a lot. The man taught me a lot. Darwin Kelton, again, traveled with the man a lot during my college years, and he taught me a lot. Jack Williams. Times I had just one-on-one with him in his office, and the things he taught me along the way. Great man of God. Many of those are dead now. Margie's mom and Margie's dad. You guys know him as Brother and Sister Hames, a lot of you. I said to somebody this week, actually, I was talking about it, and said, you know, Margie's dad, he probably taught me more my first couple of years here in Bakersfield than 4 years of college. These people took and helped me form my life. I've got to mention this also. Just, you know, we used to have the conferences here in Bakersfield, and we had the home mission team, and I probably had a little more access to the home mission team than some others, Margie and I did, because Margie's dad put it on. And Tryman and John and Roy. John and I did a few things together on the side, and amazing people that helped form my life. You know, I think back here, I'll wrap this up, but I think of Charles here in the story that we've talked about today. What would he really say if he was standing here in front of you instead of me in front of this camera right now? First of all, he'd have done a lot better job. But I think he'd be asking you a question. I think he'd be asking you a question, who packed your parachute? But I think he'd also be saying, whose parachute are you packing? Whose parachute are you packing today? So my mission is to pack somebody else's parachute. Become servants. Support others. That's our mission. That's what God's called us to do. And I think as we could kind of wrap this back up, we could say, and that's the Paul Harvey rest of the story. But I'm going to pick up a couple of fast verses here. Actually, one verse. Again, I'm going to read it in the King James, and I've got it here also in the English Standard. And the things that thou hast heard of me, among me. I'm sorry, let me start over. And the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men, who shall be able to teach others also. I'll read it here real quick in the English Standard. And what you have heard from me in the presence of my witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. I'm going to leave you with that. You guys be safe. You guys have a great Thanksgiving. Remember to pack somebody else's parachute. See you in church, or at least some of you I'll see in church, the rest of you online. And this is Alan signing out from the Kennedy compound.